Probably the biggest challenge that I face as an individual with autism, high-functioning autism or Asperger syndrome, and that I've faced throughout my life is that ability to socialize. Because a lot of people, they don't understand. They just take socializing for granted. It's something they do. They're in a group, they strike up a conversation, or someone will strike up a conversation with them. There is something going on there. I like to think of it as a Bluetooth connection. You can't see it, but you know it's there because you're on your cell phone or whatever, your device, and you're communicating with somebody. And sometimes, you get into a group of people, you've faced this, probably still are at your workplace, where people, they know how to fight. And I've always found that kind of interesting. The people know how to socialize, and a part of socializing is knowing how to fight, knowing how to not get along with each other, and they do it pretty well. I don't fit in, it seems, anywhere. And that is particularly challenging, Particularly when you need to earn a living and your income requires you to socialize with other people at the workplace. Now, a lot of folks don't stop and think that a work qualification is your ability to socialize. I say few people, I probably should say almost nobody thinks of it in those terms. But if you want to have a job, you got to be able to get along with people at the workplace. They have to like you at least a little bit. But when you go to work and you can't connect with anybody, what you discover is nobody really likes you. Sometimes they just flat out dislike you. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why do you dislike somebody in the first place? Did they do something wrong to you? Did they hurt you? Did they offend you? Did they steal from you? Did they commit some grievous offense against you or somebody that you know? Or do you just not like them? I mean, I don't get that. I don't understand it. But as a person with Asperger syndrome, that inability to connect has always been there. And it's always created a deficit, particularly when you are trying to earn a living. Now, I recall when I was in my 20s, the owner of a Kentucky Fried Chicken hired me to work for him. And I was thinking about starting a business, which eventually I did, and I kind of struck up a friendship with this guy. So, yeah, you can come work to me. You kind of learn the ropes, so to speak. And so I went to work for him, and I walked in the door, and there was the manager. This was a middle-aged woman, probably early 40s, I would guess. She had some young kids running around, which should not have been at the workplace, by the way, but there they were. But I walked in the door, and instantly I could tell this person does not like me. And it wasn't a misreading. I mean, she hated me. I don't know why. But I can tell you this, that job lasted about 2 weeks, and it wasn't long before the owner sat me down and said, sorry. He didn't say sorry. He just said, you can't work here anymore. Why is that? I mean, I didn't do anything wrong. I just walked in the door. That was it. Just by virtue of my presence, this person picked up that signal. There's, again, that Bluetooth thing where neurotypical people just seem to have this invisible ability to communicate, and a part of the communication is something that says, this is a person that I don't like. I don't fully understand that, but I do know that I've seen it and experienced it time and time and time and time again at the workplace. And if I had not been able to start my own company, my own business, probably I would be in dire straits financially at this very moment instead of being reasonably, comfortably retired. That has been a deficit from day one. I mean, it's not just when you walk into the job. I got to admit, Kentucky Fried Chicken was not the best job you could have on the planet. But, the day I walked into kindergarten, first grade, second grade, high school, it's always been there. That is a deficit. Now here I am, nearly 70 years old. And I'm still experiencing that. In fact, every opportunity that I can, I stay away from people because I know that ability to socialize is going to be detrimental. It is a major deficit. So what are some of the other difficulties that we find or that I find? Well, number 2 is what I call selective muting. I say that I call it, actually that's the clinical term for it, selective muting or something akin to that. And that is where There are some people, and in my case, it seems like it's almost everyone, that you just don't feel comfortable talking to. So you don't talk to them. There are some exceptions. I mean, throughout my life, I've had been fortunate, had some very good close friends. And I don't know why, but one thing I've noticed is that people that I have been close to throughout my life, typically, with very few exceptions, have been people who have approached me. That's because I tend not to approach people, period. But, yeah, I've had good friends, but they're few and far between. And typically when I'm around people, there is, first of all, there's an intense inferiority complex or sense of inferiority. I don't know if it's a complex or not, but it's a sense of inferiority. There is something that says, or something that compels me to be very inhibited. Again, to feel inferior around other people. And as such, I can't talk to them. Just can't communicate with them. It's almost like they are, I've used this example before, but it's kind of like you're watching a movie, on television or maybe in a movie theater, and you don't communicate with the people on the screen because, you can see them, they're there, but there's no connection. With the added dimension that there is this feeling of intimidation, this phobia, this fear of these people. Not that they can hurt you or not that they would hurt you, but there's something about that. But then take it a step further. If you say, okay, I'm going to overcome this. This is silly. And then you reach out and try to communicate with these people, try to speak with these people, which is, again, it's just about everybody. What happens is you sound silly. You sound odd when you try to communicate because, as we've said in other videos, we have this problem where our brain is scrambled. Some people say, some researchers say, that people with autism probably have too many neurons. We have too many synaptic connections, and they're all firing at once, and that confuses us. So when we try to speak to someone, we go into confusion mode, and the words that come out are confusing. They just don't seem to make sense. People pick up on that, and they say, okay, this is an odd person. I think, there's something strange about him. The uncanny valley we talked about before. It's almost like we are not human. It's kind of like we're robots. That's why people, I think, sometimes call those of us with autism space aliens. So that oddness is there. That's the second challenge that I find to be an extreme problem is just selective muting, where you cannot talk to people. Just can't communicate at all. And I think maybe, the problem that we have with eye contact, maybe selective muting light, like a version of that, or maybe an expression of that. Number 3 is attention deficit disorder. Some people add hyperactivity or something like that to attention deficit disorder. I can't say that I've ever been hyperactive, even though I've always had this thing where I got to move all the time. When I was a kid, I would walk around in circles listening to music. Or I'd get on my bicycle and I would just ride it for, till I wore myself out. And even today, I like to take long walks, So maybe there is some hyperactivity there, but by and large, one of the challenges that I faced as a person with Asperger syndrome is just that deficit in paying attention. So why is that a problem? Well, it's kind of obvious, I would think. Go to school, and one thing you got to do in school is you got to pay attention. But what if you can't? What if you sit down and instantly your mind is just gone? You're daydreaming, you're thinking about something else, you're looking outside, your mind is anywhere except on what's being said. Now, I recall that I learned a little trick to overcome attention deficit so that I wouldn't zone out when someone else is speaking, when you're in church or wherever. And what I would do is I would take notes, just write constantly, the whole time the person is speaking. So I'm sitting in church or maybe sitting in a classroom, and I'd have a notepad, and I would just write everything the person said best I could. Now, I wasn't taking notes for future reference because I couldn't read them. They were so sloppy. You pick out a thing or two. But that would help me pay attention. One of the problems with that is when you do that, people like to look over your shoulder and read what you're writing. You ever have anyone do that to you? That's so annoying. I don't know why people do it, but if I see somebody writing, I tend to look over and see what they're doing. Kind of like reading it over their shoulder. So that problem with attention deficit continues to be a problem even to this day. I've got to really be engaged in something. It's got to be something that I'm doing, because if it's something somebody else is doing and I'm supposed to be participating, I find that particularly challenging. So, I'm curious. Anyone else have that same problem besides me? Okay, number 4 is this. Just a sense of low self-esteem. I think this comes, I don't know if it comes inherently or if it's a byproduct of constantly being rejected, or if it's a combination of two. My guess is it's probably a combination of two, that you just don't think very highly of yourself. I remember when I was a kid, even into young adulthood, I was so self-conscious that I couldn't walk in a straight line sometimes. What is that? What neurological process is occurring inside a person's brain that you can't walk in a straight line simply because you are so self-conscious? Another problem I had as a teenager, and sometimes I still have, is when I'm self-conscious, I tend to smile. I'm not happy, I just smile. In fact, I remember my very first job when I was 16 years old, earned, I think, $1.67 an hour, and that was union wages. That was good. That was above minimum wage, but that's beside the point. When I would go to work, I just smile. I don't know why. I just self-conscious. I just smile, and they started calling me Smiley. I wasn't happy. There's nothing pleasant about going to work. I didn't mind doing it, but it didn't make me happy. But when I'm self-conscious, I tend to smile. I think a lot of people do that. Maybe not. Do you do that? Years ago, I was visiting China for a couple weeks, and I just thought early morning, think I'll get out and walk around and just see the sights, which basically there wasn't anything to see but shops and people. So I went out and walked up and down the street, and everyone was staring at me because they were all Chinese. I mean, everybody in the city was Chinese except for me and a handful of the handful of people that were in my group. And I was a sight to behold because I wasn't Chinese. And I didn't expect that. Everybody was staring at me. They tried to be polite, but they'd stare out the corner of your eyes and they'd turn their heads and who's this guy? Obviously an American. Sometimes little kids, would run up to you and say hello, laugh and run away because I guess that's the only English word they knew. And they just assumed I was an American. I don't know why they didn't know I wasn't, German or French or European, but they just assumed I was American. But I would just walk around and smile. I wasn't particularly happy. I wasn't sad, but I was self-conscious. So that low self-esteem and self-consciousness, which seem to go hand in hand, it has an expression. It has a face to it. And sometimes it's a happy face, but it's not happy. It's just an expression. A literal expression that we have on our face. So, so you're walking down the street, can't walk in a straight line, you're smiling, and people think, this guy's a little bit weird. Now, you got to admit, that is a little bit weird, right? So low self-esteem has always been a problem. But number 5 that I have encountered is depression. And I know I'm not alone on this because there's so many studies that say that reveal, I should say, that people with Asperger syndrome, with autism, have a much higher instance of depression. My guess is that may be neurological, it may be comorbid with autism, but it could also be a response or reaction to the challenges, these 5 challenges and some others. By the way, I'd be curious to know if you want to put this in the comments section, and I think some other people watching may be curious to know what your deficits are, so some of the things that you find difficult. So I was reading one study. This is from Cambridge University, cambridge.org. And according to that study, 20 to 35% of ASD adults, that is autism spectrum disorder adults seek help for depression, 20 to 35%. That is compared to 7% for the general population. So statistically, people with autism are at the very best, according to this study, at the very best, 3 times more likely to seek help for depression than neurotypical people. And at the very worst, they are 7 times. So it's somewhere between 3 to 7 times more likely to seek help for depression than neurotypical people, or we could say the instances of depression are 3 times to 7 times higher than the population in general. And that's kind of a problem. So it compounds these other problems, particularly the inability to socialize. So if you have this dark cloud of depression that is compressing, I think is a good word, because if you just feel that pressure, compressing your thoughts, compressing your brain, it seems like, maybe not physically, but that's the way it seems. Well, you can't socialize to begin with, and you got this cloud of depression, so you're kind of sad and sulky, and you're not exuberant by any means, and one just compounds the other. One just leads to the other. It's kind of like cyclical, kind of like you're rolling down a hill. See those 2 rectangles on the screen? Let's keep talking if you want. All you got to do is click one of those 2 rectangles, and our conversation will continue. If not, well, thanks for stopping by, and see y'all next time.